Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. Oopsies! A couple weeks ago in my people-pleasing episode, I told you that the next episode would be about deciding when it's time to let something go in your business. Then I proceeded to talk about how much fun content and marketing can be instead of letting something go. And now I'm still not getting into letting things go just yet. I'm actually getting into how things started in the first place. Now, I promise I will speak to how to know when it's time to give something up, let it go, put it aside, end it, and actually like how to go about doing that. I've been working on my ideas around that. I have lots to share, but it needed to percolate a little bit longer. So this week I want to talk about your beginnings. Sometimes this is referred to as your origin story, where it all began. One of the services I offer my clients is a super simple, speedy service I call the Bio Builder, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes if you want to check it out. But basically, it's for all those spots on your website, your LinkedIn profile, anywhere that you have to talk about yourself or someone else is introducing you, like where you have to tell your story. And so when I do the Bio Builders, I always have people talk to me about why on earth they got into what they're doing and like how it all began. I want to know their story. I also, I unsurprisingly ask people this in our kickoff calls when I'm doing a bigger project for them, like their website copy or a blogging project or, one of their marketing materials. Now, sometimes people just jump right in and they tell me their stories. And sometimes people start their stories with a sentence like this. Well, it's not very exciting, but, and then they go on to tell their story. So they sort of disclaim it or caveat, however you want to say it, with kind of like a, don't get your hopes up. This isn't a very exciting. The truth is, you may not have some wildly life-changing origin story. I don't. But it is still exciting. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about how to make it even more so, how to kind of bring it out, bring it to life, and share it in maybe different ways than you've ever thought of before. I'm going to hold off introducing myself like I usually do because I will actually just be kind of like sharing pieces of my story the whole way through as examples. But I will simply say, for introduction's sake, in case you've never heard this podcast before, I'm Emily Aborn. I'm a copywriter. I write lots of stories for people on their websites, their bios, and beyond. I'm really all about like digging out the heart and soul, the essence, if you will, of their stories and their messages and who they are. It's kind of like my superpower. So I also want to make sure to read the review of the week and also acknowledge our reviewer of the week because this one is so sweet. And speaking of origin stories, oh my gosh, this one actually comes from somebody I used to work with as a waitress in Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, to be clear, she always waitressed at the restaurant we were working at. I had to move my way up the ladder. I started as a hostess at that restaurant, and then I finally made my way up to the esteemed position of waitress, but I made it there eventually. Okay, so this one comes from my pal Crystal704, who says, all things content with charisma. And I just want to say, sidebar, Crystal, I love the word charisma, so thank you. Great word choice. Content with Character is my new favorite podcast. Emily talks about things relative to business in a personal and informative way. I always feel like I'm having a cup of coffee with her, and she's telling me everything she knows. I love how she gives personal stories and examples when she's talking. Crystal, I wish we could have a cup of coffee together. Thank you so much for this fabulous review, and today will be no exception with the personal stories and examples. But in all seriousness, to you as well, I really, really appreciate your reviews. First, they help me know what you love and want more of here on the show. And that is really what this podcast is all about. It is literally all about you and being helpful to you. And so secondly, I also appreciate reviews because they do help me too. They help the old podcast algorithm gods know like who else might enjoy this show too. And it shows that to them as well. So thank you so much for every single review. And if you haven't written one yet, you can use the Apple Podcast app or Spotify or I think Good Pods as well and write one. Okay, light housekeeping over. Let's dive in. Let's start by defining the origin story because there's probably a good number of you listening who have actually maybe never heard of an origin story. So in marketing, your origin story is a narrative that explains how your company came to be or why you started your business. It might include the what, the who, the where, the when, the how. And also it tends to highlight like any memorable or important stories that really, I think, get to the heart of the matter of why, and not just why you? Why now? Why this, right? So it's a little bit of like a peek behind the curtains. And I think that when it's done right, it conveys a lot of passion, a lot of meaning behind what you do. It also brings your humanness forward in your business. And you, by way of creating it and sitting down and thinking about it, I feel like you uncover a whole lot of surprises. All right. So what popped into my mind as I was thinking about all this is like, in movies or in TV shows when they keep on flashing back to memories throughout like the hero's life, right? Like the hero's going about the plot line, la-di-la-di-da, but they keep flashing back to these memories which correlate maybe to the decisions that they're making in their present day, or it relates to the themes in what you're watching. So an origin story, I want you to think of it like that. It's kind of like a flashback, but with less special effects. It explains like the motivation and drives behind what you do, and also a little bit more about who you are and where you came from. So it's really exciting. I honestly think it's really fun. I mean, I know you hear me say that all the time, but I really, really think it's fun. So I kind of loved this concept. If I had to like condense it onto like a quippy social media quote card or something, I was thinking it's like the story behind the I. Not like eyeball eye, but like I. Okay. So I am not really like the person who knows. I don't really know a lot of things about like famous people. Like I don't really know facts about well-known people. So to help grease my wheels, to give me a little bit of help on knowing like some popular origin stories or some well-known maybe origin stories, I went to the internet. So I just have 5. So first one, Sarah Blakely. She got her first $250 million product, Spanx, into stores by like demonstrating them herself to store buyers while wearing a pair of form-fitting white pants. Oprah Winfrey. She overcame sexual abuse and poverty and built a $4 billion media empire. Richard Branson. He was a high school dropout and he started Virgin Records as a mail order record company. J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter while at coffee shops, struggling as a single mom to make ends meet. Warren Buffett started out as an entrepreneur by buying pinball machines and saving up the revenue that he got by placing them in local shops. So I'm not here to argue like whether or not you agree with these entrepreneurs or not, but all of these I just share their rags to riches examples with like really big transformations. I don't know all the ins and outs of their story, but what I like about these short kind of examples is you can see how an entire origin story can actually be expressed in a pretty short, sweet, and simple way, in a way that kind of like piques your interest and your curiosity and you want to know more. So even in their short form, the origin story can actually tell you quite a bit, and it also helps you to relate to these people kind of like no matter where you are in your journey. And so that brings me to this whole, like what I really want to start with is like, why does the origin story matter in the first place? Why would we take time to think about it, to sit down and create it? Here are some reasons I thought of. I came up with 6. So number 1, when you share your origin story or the story of your beginnings, it helps you to be relatable. So people are able to see themselves in you, connect with what you went through, hear what you overcame, your values, your vision, your passion, etc. Number 2, it connects people to your actual brand. I've always heard that people, like even with Starbucks and Target and Nike and like those bigger name brand companies, people really do connect to the brand through the story and the personality of the brand. So I like that about it. Number 3, it does help to build trust with people. So when they know a little bit more about you and where you came from and how you got started, in a lot of cases, it can build trust and credibility and expertise, right? So the 4th one is that it is inspiring to people coming behind you or those people walking alongside you. Like an origin story, I used to listen to the podcast, How I Built This, all the time. And those origin stories were just like so inspiring to me. Some of them I will never, ever forget. Number 5, I think that it's really helpful to answer questions that might be in people's minds, or maybe questions that they didn't even know that they had about you. And then lastly, number 6, I think it's just a good practice for you to be creative. So I like sitting down, thinking about different pieces of the origin story as an opportunity for my own self to be reflective, to celebrate, give myself a little credit, right? And also just like let my creative process kind of flow. So the other piece I just want to pull out here is there are lots and lots of stories within an origin story. So sitting down and actually like writing it out, or at least getting out the highlights, it can help you to kind of dig into those other stories therein. And when you do, you're going to find, oh my gosh, there is so much gold here. There are so many stories within this one story. So how do you actually do it? What elements make up an origin story? So to begin, I think first and foremost, you kind of have to decide which part of the origin story or which origin story, if you have several, that you're telling. And also consider this. Consider who you're talking to. Like I said, we all have a number of stories within our stories. So for example, when I am giving a workshop at SCORE or my local entrepreneurship center, I will share a different element of my origin story than when I'm, let's say, talking to a client on a kickoff call. I usually tailor the story, the piece of the origin story, to the topic that I'm presenting on, which you hear me do that on this podcast too. So as an example, as a lifetime example, I'll share a funny one around podcasting. So like a lot of you listening, I was that kid who thought that a tape recorder was like God's gift to mankind. I thought tape recorders were amazing. I listened to like a lot of books on tape and kids sort of stories on tape when my mom would drive us places because we lived forever away from everything. And so when I heard those, I knew, oh my gosh, I want to be able to like tell stories on tape like they do. So I would get blank cassette tapes. They were like a prize. And if I couldn't find a blank one, oh my gosh, I hope my mom never listens to this, but I would just record over something else and usually get in trouble for it later. But I would record everything. I would record conversations. I would record myself doing like pretend cooking shows. Like, here's how you make a peanut butter and jelly, right? Here's how I mise en place the tuna for the tuna salad. I would record news reports and also myself singing. So like I like to say, and this may or may not be entirely true, but I like to say I was a podcaster before podcasting was even a thing. For my senior project in high school, I did a project on death and dying in families. I was an odd one, yes. And I conducted all of my interviews on tape with the families that had experienced loss. Then I took all of those tapes and I kind of edited them together to be able to share those stories through my final presentation when I was sharing my research. So in my podcasting journey, the turning point really came for me when I really was like, oh my gosh, podcasting is a thing and I love this. The turning point came for me in 2008. I got to sit down with my boss at the time, Jenny, and be her co-host for her radio show. It was a podcast called For the Health of It. I believe the episode that we did was about chronotypes, and yeah, I got to include a link for you in the show notes, my friend, because just for kicks and giggles, because it was very silly. But I tell you what, sitting down with her and doing that was the moment. That was the moment I knew that I wanted this for myself someday. Like I wanted to have a podcast someday. And then it took me a whopping decade to get my chance again back in that chair. Ironically, right back where I started in that same studio. I ended up taking a class on how to start a podcast, and then I took the class a second time, and then no surprises here. I went ahead and started my first podcast. She built this in 2018. And this podcast, the Content with Character podcast, it has its own origin story. But you can just see, and I use this as an example, that's how I can take a bigger origin story and kind of condense it down to be relevant to this medium, the podcasting medium. So if I was doing a workshop or a presentation about podcasting, I would kind of probably use that piece, that sample of the bigger origin story, because it's relevant to this topic. And that I think is what you kind of want to begin with. Like, so once you've kind of got out the elements of all the big pieces, you want to start with thinking about like, who am I sharing this part of my story with? Who is this person? What am I actually sharing about? And how can I make the story relevant, or why is the story relevant for the given situation, the given setting? Okay. Now you can also hear that my story was not wildly exciting. It was not wildly life altering. I didn't have some like major catastrophic event, but there are questions that you can like kind of ask yourself to maybe get a little bit more of that excitement or life altering element. Like how I said, this is the moment it all changed for me. That really actually was true. And so these might be those simple, subtle, understated moments, but they are no less impactful, informative, and I think these questions really can help to bring out some of that excitement. So here are the questions. I'm going to give you 6 of them, and I will, for this episode, sometimes I like to give you extended show notes. I'm going to give you extended show notes so that you can find all of these questions right there. And if you ever like miss the show notes or you jump off the podcast before you get to them, you can find them on my website, EmilyAborn.com, and then it's under the podcast tab, Content with Character. All of the episodes and the extended show notes live there. So there you go. You don't even have to go to the show notes. You can bypass it all and go to the website. All right, so here are the questions. The first question is like, first of all, just why did you start your company? Why did you start your business or your brand? And let me ask you this. Why you? Like, why was this so important to you? Okay. Question number 2. And I know I ask lots of questions in one. That's like the running joke. I am the question person and I always have more than one question and I like to ask them all at the same time. So question number 2, what were the moments or the experiences that have shaped you in your life? What are the events and the challenges that like paved the way for where you are now? What are the successes that paved the way for where you are now? Did you have like an aha moment like I kind of did? And if so, what was that moment? Where were you? Who else was with you in the room? What were you hearing, seeing, experiencing? Here's question number 3. Who are the people who have influenced your journey and how have those people shaped you? This might look like mentors or family or friends or inspirers. Now, I have a lot of these people in my life, and I include a lot of them in different elements of my story. One of them for me, as I just shared with you, that chiropractor I was working for in 2008. And in fact, she was actually a huge piece of my origin story. She also impacted my choice to go to school for health education in the first place, which is what I studied in school. I was a big in college. I was a big fan of like biology class and health and nutrition. I was a huge fan. I could not get enough. But I didn't actually know that that could be a actual career. I just kind of thought like, and now I know enough to read the back of a granola bar or a cereal box, right? This chiropractor, Jenny, she comes to my high school. She was probably younger than I am now. And she gave a presentation to my school about the amazing power of the human body's desire to heal itself, its natural ability to heal itself. When I heard her present, I was hooked for multiple reasons. First, just like the fact that she had just presented something entirely engaging was awesome, and she did such a fantastic job. And then second, that topic of health and the human body and just all the possibility and potential therein, I was like, oh my gosh, this is mind-blowing, my favorite thing ever. So I went up to her after, and I asked her, how can I get started in doing what you do? Like, I want to teach health education. I want to inspire people like you just did. And basically, she kind of like mapped it out for me. She told me what I should go to school for, or guided me in what I should go to school for, and told me to go for it. And she also hired me for my first job out of college once I got that health education degree. Now, obviously, I am not a health not obviously, I guess, but I'm not a health educator today. That's another piece of my origin story for another day on how I kind of pivoted in there. But she's a great example of somebody in my life who shaped, influenced, and inspired me, sometimes uninspired me. There are people that sometimes uninspire you, right? Like there's this whole cast of characters that left a mark, if you will, and they're all a part of our origin stories. So who are those people for you? Who are the mentors, the family, the friends, the coaches, the inspirers, the uninspirers, maybe the therapist, the guidance counselors, the teachers? Who is it for you? Okay, and question number 4 is, did you have a moment that you wanted to give up, that you wanted to totally throw in the towel, give up, forget about it? And if so, how did you stop yourself? Or maybe somebody else in your life intervened. Those are all parts of your origin story. And those are really important, interesting parts of your origin story, because we've kind of all been probably up against a wall where we just want to give up. I won't get into all of these stories now, but I'm sure just like me, you can probably think of a few times, right? In different iterations of yourself, different legs of your journey. And I love these pieces because they show resilience, they show innovation, they show creativity, they show that stick-to-itiveness and that scrappiness, and also like what makes you really different from others in the commitment to how you've built your business. So think about those moments for yourself. When did you want to just like throw in the towel, give up? Maybe you actually did. Maybe that was your turning point. Question number 5, what curiosity, passion, or interest relates to or drove you to the work that you do today? That's a really fun one because the chances are very high that some of these curiosities pop out of nowhere. Some of these passions, some of these interests pop out of nowhere. Some of them are threads that have been with us since we were little kids, right? And that's how I feel about writing. That's how I feel about reading, learning. Like I have just had that curiosity, that passion, and that interest since I was a little kid. I was the kid who decided I was going to write my first book at like age 5 and also loved reading me some encyclopedias. Okay, question number 6. What lessons have you learned along the way? Now, this, I'm like, oh my God. Someone asked me just recently what like the biggest piece of advice I would give or what lesson I've learned along the way. And I'm like, oh my God, I have like 20. This could be, no joke, a series of blogs. Like if you wanted to sit down, I bet you could write down the top 5 lessons of just about anything in your life. You got business, you got friendship, you got marriage, you got parenting, you got, being an employee, like collaborating. Those are all great examples of lessons that you've learned along the way. and also great examples of stories within the stories. And you can see how when you relate those specifically to a topic you're talking about or presenting on or sharing with, they are just like a world of abundant content within themselves. So maybe you think about it in those categories I gave you. Maybe you do think about your 5 top lessons of business. Maybe you do think about the 5 top lessons of friendship or marriage or collaborating or podcasting or podcast guesting or parenting or being a dog mom. Those are all stories within your stories. So that all brings me to, those are the questions. And like I said, I will include them in that extended show notes link. So don't worry. The fact that I pummeled you with like 3 in one, every single one, they'll all be in one place where you can easily find them. And that brings me to, where do you actually use this stuff? Like, where do you use this story, these stories? And I'm going to say, where do you use them? Because like I said, there's a lot of them. And maybe like me, you've even been like, oh my God, there's so many stories. I should write a memoir. And maybe you should. Maybe that is where you share all your stories. For me, that's not really realistic right now. So instead, I just kind of have to sort of condense everything into like actual practical places and projects to share them. So here are some ideas of where you can share your origin story and or elements therein, elements of it. Obviously, one of them is your website, and I'm going to specifically bring up your About page. Now, there is so much I could say about pages because they're not all about you. But if you decide to share your story on your About page, which I think you should, just remember that the goal here is to create a connection with the person on the other side, meaning the About page is not just all about you. We're looking to create a connection with the person on the other side. So if you're going to tell your story on your About page, which again, I think you should, make sure you're also speaking to, acknowledging the person on that other side and bring them into the story with you. Meaning, tell them why your story matters to them. Ask them if they ever have had these experiences as well. Or maybe it's that experience that makes you so passionate about working with this kind of person. So one place I highly recommend you share your origin story and or parts of your origin story is your About page. Second place is like when you are kicking off a presentation or a workshop, or I remember when we were first looking for financial support, when we were looking for funding for our first business. It was a retail shop. We actually, my husband and I, used pieces of our origin story to make the case for why this was a good choice for our investors. We were, first of all, showing why we were good candidates. We had to show kind of like what our values were and also why we could be trusted with their bajillion-dollar investment. Just kidding. It was definitely not that much. But we had to show them like our origin story in addition to the market research, right? At that time, to convince them that like we would look after their money, despite the fact that I did not look after my college debt as well as I should. I had to talk to them about like what has changed and why and the kind of person that I was. So that's another idea is looking for like if you are looking to share support or to get support or making your pitch, that's a great place for you to share your origin story. But I also love it for just like a keynote or for a presentation or for a workshop or for a podcast episode, right? In some cases, you're going to find like a lot of lessons and takeaways from that origin story. Some people use their origin story as the entire keynote or presentation, and it's so wonderful and exciting and inspiring and engaging when they do. So the thing I would just say is if that is you, if that applies for you, remember just to keep that audience centric and focused on the people that are in the room with you. Another idea is to use it when you're introducing yourself to people, whether you're networking or whether you're on discovery calls or lead calls, whatever you like to call them. You can use elements of your origin story in those settings. And I think it's just a great way to help people to get to know you, to trust you, to build that connection with you, and also sometimes, like I said, lends itself to your credibility and your expertise. The other places are pretty simple and probably obvious, but like social media, blogs, emails, on podcast episodes, in other people's podcasts, when guesting. And then I think even like really nice abbreviated versions can be wonderful in networking settings. The list goes on and on. I could go on forever because, like I said, there are parts and pieces within all of these stories. There are multiple stories here. And that's why I think it's so valuable to just like sit down or stand up and start getting a lot of it out, whether you do it in written form or whether you voice record it, because then you actually have these pieces, these elements to go back and pull the gems from and apply them in different ways. So lastly, I just want to give you 5 little tips. These are tips on actually constructing it. And then we're going to answer one last question. And it's a question that was in my mind as I was putting all this together. So I'm guessing that means it may be in yours too. So onward with the real quick 5 tips. Number 1, this one should be obvious to you by now, especially if you're a loyal listener, but be yourself. Don't be somebody else. Like I said, it's obvious, but I mean it. This is your story, your time. And even if you've been through something similar to somebody else who tells the most amazing origin story ever, do it your way. Remember to share yours, not theirs. And that does mean also bring in pieces of your personality, your emotion, your character, your humor, if applicable. Be yourself. Number 2, be honest. This is not the place to lie, embellish, or exaggerate. Number 3, be concise. No matter how you're applying this, make sure that you've ironed it out enough to be concise. I have a funny example of when I almost didn't do this. I decided for some reason that I wanted to tell the entire story of my entrepreneurial journey on my other podcast, my She Built This podcast. So I wrote out the entire thing. I mean, I went back to like 5-year-old Emily, the little peanut, sitting on the counter in a trailer park in Maine, quizzing my mom on her medical terminology course words. And then I sat down and recorded the episode. An hour, maybe longer later, I bobbed my head up for air and I was like, oh my God, no one will ever want to listen to this. I don't even want to listen to this. Like, this is painful. I had included every last detail. I had most definitely not been concise or poignant, really, in any way. And thankfully, I did not share that episode. So be concise and be, like I said, like fitting to the situation, the context that you're sharing in. Number 4, be concise, but also include detail. Like, we don't need to pummel them with detail. We don't need to give every last detail, but you want those nice, specific details, the ones that are like, that make it a little bit spicy, but also the ones that get us into the story and bring us into the moment. So, for example, when I was talking about that woman coming to my high school to talk about health, it would have been okay for me to set the scene for you. Like, maybe I described what the chapel looked like that we were sitting in and how those cushions of the maroon chairs were worn so thin that like every day in chapel, my butt would hurt from sitting there. Maybe I would tell you how we all filed in to the room, single file, wearing our little uniforms, or how boring chapel usually was and why it was so amazing and this was such a welcome exception to the boredom. Maybe I would tell you that it kind of looked like Christmas barf everywhere because it was an entirely red room everywhere and we were sitting in there, a sea of green uniformed children. So you can include details like those because what I like about them is it helps the person listening or reading or watching to have an image in their mind, which will then help that story be more memorable, but it also places them in the scene and it makes them very like relatable. And you can actually like start to feel things in your body and hear things and smell things as the person listening to the story. So use details about other people in your story, about how you felt, about what sounds you heard, smells, anything to bring them in without miring them down in endless detail. It's a fine but important line. If you need help, get help in doing this part. Last tip, number 5, practice your stories. Be consistent. Practice, put them in motion, and you will refine it over time. You'll get clearer on the pieces that matter most to you. You'll get better and better at how you share. You'll be more concise. You'll include those relevant details. Keep on practicing. Don't give up. Keep going. And if you do want somebody to help kind of like talk through these different elements, pull pieces out of you, there's a number of ways that I can help you do that. Like I told you, have that bio builder. I also have a freebie, which I'll make sure I include in the show notes as well, where you can just build your own bio. But I also do like pages on your website. We can talk about it in a strategy session. I could get you a brand messaging guide. Like there's lots of things. So what I'm saying, it doesn't even need to be me. I don't need you to choose me to help you. But what I'm saying is you don't have to go it alone. You can get feedback and help from friends, experts, fellow business owners, your speaking club, your networking group, like get all of those people kind of engaged in you refining these stories. So real quick, before we wrap up, a question I had was this. Well, I have not quote unquote arrived yet. Like I haven't accomplished what I want to yet. I'm not where I want to be yet. So should I even bother with writing or thinking about this origin story? Like who cares? I'm not anything. I'm not hot to trot, right? So what if that's the case for you too? Like what if you're not where you want to be yet? What if you don't actually think you're like done overcoming what you're trying to overcome yet? So if there's one thing I like more than an origin story, it's an I'm on my way story, because I would say that most of us are still on our way. I can't actually think of many people in my life who I look at and they say, and I say, oh my God, that person has arrived. So telling your origin story with the ongoing struggles, with the aspirations, with the things that have changed and shifted and things you wish you knew then that you're learning now, how maybe sharing like how you've come so far. It's all beautiful and inspiring, and it can be really, really relatable and really helpful for those right alongside you, coming up behind you, or just somewhere else entirely. So it doesn't matter where you are. Share your stories no matter what, and it doesn't also matter where you're heading. And if you miss that mark entirely, because that's going to become a part of your story too. So that's it for today. Let me know if this inspires you at all to write yours, share yours, think about yours. Like I said, you can always find all the links to everything I share in the show notes. And you can also, in the show notes, find the way to text the show, leave a voicemail, email me. All the links are in the show notes. I put them all there for you, so don't be shy. Okay, next week we're getting into what I wish I'd known sooner, or what I wish somebody had told me. And then I promise we will talk about when you want to give up and let something go. What happens when you run out of steam, and how do you actually let the thing go? You have my word. We will talk about that after this next one. I will chat with you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com, and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.